Hello and welcome. The headline says Indonesia's massive election vote count begins. Israeli strikes deep in Rafah panic. House impeaches first cabinet member in 150 years. Senate passes 95 billion US dollars aid for Ukraine and Israel, and Biden slams Trump on Putin NATO breach. On election matters, on Wednesday, elections open in the immense country of Indonesia, with over 200 million voters casting their ballots to elect a new president in what is billed as the world's biggest single-day election. The expansive Southeast Asian nation, the world's third largest electoral democracy and largest Muslim-majority country, has made striking gains since the fall of the late dictator Suharto's authoritarian regime in 1998, transforming into one of Asia's most vibrant democracies and economies. Hosting a vote in the world's largest archipelagic nation is a big attempt. The country is wider than the United States and spans 3 time zones. It is made up of over 18,000 islands and islets, of which 6,000 are inhabited, and over 150 languages spoken across its breadth. The campaign has been dominated by big personalities in a decisive election that will also select some 20,000 other national and provincial lawmakers. According to the General Election Commission, younger Indonesians are major, with around half of registered voters being under the age of 40. Job opportunities are top of mind of many voters, with presidential hopefuls vowing to propel the country's economic growth fueled by rich natural resources and trade opportunities. But climate change and illegal logging challenge Indonesia's sustainable future. Defense Minister Prabowo Subianto is seen as the front runner. 2 former provincial governors, Anies Baswedan and Ganjar Pranowo, also vying for the country's top job. Heavy rain and flooding caused some difficulties on the morning of the election day, mostly in Jakarta and Java, but not seem to dampen voters' enthusiasm. The public count started almost immediately after polls ended. A candidate gets over 50% of the vote to be declared an outright winner. If no one meets that threshold, there will be a runoff between the top candidates on June 26th. On Israel-Gaza conflict, anxiety is rising in Rafah as worried Palestinians decide whether to flee their last refuge in Gaza as Israel draws up plans for a ground offensive that the United Nations aid chief has warned could lead to a slaughter. An increasing number of countries and international organizations are now struggling to convince Israel to stop its planned offensive, with Ireland's Taoiseach or Prime Minister Leo Varadkar accusing the country of becoming blinded by rage. On Tuesday, the South African government made an urgent request to the International Court of Justice (ICJ) to determine if Israel's extended military actions in the southern Gazan city require it to use its power to prevent further imminent breach of the rights of Palestinians in Gaza. Israel has been shelling Rafah with airstrikes for weeks and says it is committed to a ground offensive as the alternative is to surrender to Hamas and to sacrifice 134 people, Israeli military spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner said, according to reports on Tuesday, referring to the Israelis held hostage in Gaza. That is not an option for Israel's perspective, he said. It remains unclear how or when a ground offensive will unfold, and that ambiguity is adding to anxiety among Palestinians in Rafah about where to go and what to do. Chief Martin Griffiths, United Nations aide, on Tuesday cautioned that such an offensive could lead to a slaughter and leave humanitarian efforts in Gaza at death's door. He urged Israel to listen to the international community's warnings against the dangerous consequences of a ground invasion, saying history will not be kind if those calls are ignored. Last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu directed the country's military to plan for the evacuation of the population from Rafah after saying that the Israel Defense Forces will soon go into Rafah, Hamas's last bastion. The military targets to establish a plan that evacuates civilians out of harm's way and differentiates civilians between Hamas militants, IDF spokesperson Lerner said. However, it has not yet presented its evacuation plan to the government, he said on Tuesday. over 1.3 million people are now crammed into a sprawling tent city packed against the Egyptian border in Rafah, the only nominally safe space for Palestinians fleeing the north and center of Gaza. Families are already living with severe shortages of food, water, medicine, and shelter, and the daily risk of being killed by Israeli fire. South Africa called Rafah the last refuge for surviving people in Gaza and suggested that Israel's offensive there will be in serious and irreparable breach both of the Genocide Convention and the ICJ's January court order, which required Israel to take more measures to prevent genocide in Gaza. Now, the House of Representatives, by a tremendously slim margin, voted on Tuesday to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, the first cabinet secretary to be impeached in almost 150 years. The result came 1 week after the striking loss House Republicans suffered when they last tried to impeach Mayorkas and GOP defectors, and absence sank the initial floor vote, a move Republicans had hoped to use to spotlight the Biden administration's handling of the southern border. The impeachment comes as House Republicans have faced growing pressure from their base to hold President Joe Biden and his departments and agencies accountable over immigration and border security policies. House Republicans claim Mayorkas has committed high crimes and misbehaviors for handling of the southern border, even though many constitutional experts have said the evidence does not reach that high bar. Only one cabinet official has earlier been impeached in American history, that Secretary of War William Belknap in 1876. Tuesday's vote was 214 to 213. Three Republicans, Ken Buck of Colorado, Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, and Tom McClintock of California, voted with Democrats against the measure. The Department of Homeland Security said that House Republicans will be remembered by history for trampling on the Constitution following the vote to impeach. DHS spokesperson Mia Ehrenberg said in a statement that House Republicans will be remembered by history for trampling on the Constitution for political gain rather than working to solve the serious challenges at our border. Secretary Mayorkas and the Department of Homeland Security will continue working every day to keep Americans safe, the statement said. Last week, the absence of House Majority Leader Steve Scalise and the surprise attendance by Texas Democrat Al Green, who had just had surgery and was wheeled into the chamber to vote, denied Republicans to vote approve the measure. In a vote early on Tuesday morning, the Senate passed a $95.3 billion foreign aid bill with support for Israel and Ukraine, setting up a showdown with the House, as Speaker Mike Johnson has said he does not plan to bring the bill to the floor. The foreign aid package includes billions of dollars to support Ukraine and for security assistance for Israel, as well as humanitarian aid for civilians in Gaza, the West Bank, and Ukraine, among other priorities. The bill passed the Senate despite Johnson's criticism of the legislation and ex-President Donald Trump signaling opposition to the bill by arguing the U.S. should stop providing foreign aid unless it is in the form of a loan. The Senate vote was 70 to 29, with 22 Republicans voting in favor, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. According to the Senate Appropriations Committee, the bill includes $60 billion to support Ukraine in its fight against Russia, $14.1 billion in security assistance for Israel, $9.2 billion in humanitarian assistance, and $4.8 billion to support regional partners in the Indo-Pacific region, in addition to other policy provisions. Johnson said, according to reports on Tuesday, that he's not planning to put the package on the House floor, setting up a major clash between the two chambers. President Joe Biden called on House Republicans to hold a vote on the bill in remarks from the White House, saying that a minority of the most extreme voices in the House should not be permitted to block the bill. The president sent a blunt warning that if lawmakers fail to act, Russian President Vladimir Putin won't limit himself just to Ukraine, and the costs for America and our allies and partners are going to rise. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky appreciated Schumer, McConnell, and every U.S. senator who has supported continued assistance to Ukraine as we fight for freedom, democracy, and the values we all hold dear, in a statement on Tuesday. Still sticking with the United States, on Tuesday, President Joe Biden slammed Donald Trump after the former president said he will encourage Russia to attack countries that don't meet their NATO obligations, saying such comments amount to bowing down to Vladimir Putin. The remarks Biden's newest criticism of Trump from the White House are some of his harshest criticism of his likely rival on foreign policy to date. Speaking on Saturday at a rally in South Carolina, Trump said he will encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want to any NATO member country that doesn't meet spending guidelines on defense. Biden said those comments sent a dangerous and shocking signal. Biden started his speech by encouraging the House of Representatives to immediately hold a vote on the Senate-passed $95 billion supplemental aid package that will provide aid to Ukraine, Israel, and U.S. partners in the Indo-Pacific region, as well as humanitarian assistance to Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Over $60 billion from the Senate package will have been allocated to Ukraine as the country gets ready to mark the second anniversary of its full-scale invasion by Russia. Previous attempts to pass an aid package combined with a border security bill were scuttled after Trump came out in opposition. Trump's comment drew immediate consternation not only from the American foreign policy establishment but from NATO allies who have watched warily as Russia proceeds with invasion of Ukraine. For Biden, who has spent much of his career working on issues related to transatlantic security, this remark was particularly galling when he heard about the remarks afterward. The president was aghast, according to a person familiar with the matter. He later issued a statement through his campaign decrying the sentiment. The White House criticized Trump's comments shortly after they were made. White House spokesperson Andrew Bates said in a statement on Saturday, encouraging invasions of our closest allies by murderous regimes is appalling and unhinged, and it endangers American national security, global stability, and our economy at home. But Biden's criticism of Trump from the White House went a step further in a speech that mentioned Trump by name at least a half a dozen times, but sought to forcefully rebut questions about American commitment to its allies. On Tuesday, Biden spent an important portion of his speech on Ukraine aid, going after Trump for the remark, which he said undercuts long-standing U.S. values. He said Trump viewed the defense alliance as a protection racket and didn't understand its role in protecting freedom and security. Away from the United States, now more stories. Gunfire strikes home of Canadian Sikh separatists. In Brampton, Ontario on Monday, the home of a Canadian Sikh activist was hit by gunfire months after the assassination of another activist sent India-Canada relations into a spiral. A bullet hole was found in the window of Adajit Singh Ghosal's home by construction workers, according to the local police and the US-based group Sikhs for Justice, a group Ghosal had been working with that advocates for a separate Sikh homeland. Peel Regional Police wrote in a statement, it appears that only one bullet hole was found, but that is subject to change. The police said a probe was underway, adding that while it was unknown at this time if there is any relation to the group Sikhs for Justice, investigators will consider all possibilities. Sikhs for Justice believes Ghosal may have been targeted for his role in campaigning for the creation of a separate Sikh homeland out of India, which will be known as Khalistan and include parts of India's Punjab state. The group, which supports the creation of Khalistan, said in a statement that the bullet hole was found days after Ghosal announced the Khalistan Freedom Rally at the Indian Consulate, Toronto, on February 17th. Campaigning for the creation of Khalistan has long been outlawed in India, where painful memories of a deadly insurgency by some Sikh separatists continue to haunt many Indian citizens, but it garners a level of public sympathy among some in the Sikh diaspora overseas, where protected by free speech laws, activists can more openly advocate for secession from India. The movement gained international prominence when Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the India, claimed in September he had credible information linking the Indian government to the killing of prominent Sikh leader and Khalistan supporter Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The Canadian citizen was gunned down by masked men last June outside a Sikh temple in British Columbia. The allegation outraged India, which has vehemently denied the claim, calling it absurd and motivated. The diplomatic fallout saw tit-for-tat expulsions of senior diplomats from both countries. Weeks later, the United States accused an Indian government official of being involved in a conspiracy to kill another Sikh separatist, American citizens Gurpatwan Sikh Panun, on U.S. soil. Gosal, the man whose house was hit by gunfire in Ontario, is a close aide to Panun, who is the chief legal counsel for Sikhs for Justice and is considered a terrorist by the Indian government. In Africa, numerous killed as two boats crashed on Congo River. In the Democratic Republic of Congo on Monday, dozens of people died and several others are reported missing after two boats collided on the Congo River near Kinshasa. In dramatic images taken moments after they crashed into one another, horrified residents can be seen watching from the riverbank as small boats raced out in a bid to rescue passengers. It was not instantly clear how many were saved or what caused the accident between the two boats, which were loaded with people and goods. Rivers are significant to transport in the vast Central African country, which has a very poor road infrastructure. Deadly boating accidents occur regularly as crews often overload the vessels. Most river traffic is run by small informal operators, and officials have cautioned that adherence to maritime regulations is also poor. Still on the news, United Nations urges Senegal security to respect human rights as protests continue in Senegal against President Macky Sall's decision to postpone the country's elections to December. There is growing fear over the behavior of security forces. Last week, there were deadly clashes between demonstrators and police after Sall said the 25th February elections were being moved to the end of the year. His announcement sent Senegal into a crisis and has increased a backlash against what many see as an attempt by the president to extend his mandate. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR, and other human rights organizations have called on the authorities to ensure that they uphold the country's long-held tradition of democracy and respect for human rights. It is crucial that the authorities unequivocally order the security forces to respect and ensure human rights, including the rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, said OHCHR spokesperson Liz Throssell. At least 3 young men were killed during protests, and at least 266 people have reportedly been arrested across the country, including journalists, she said. Amid the rising tension and reports of plans for the protest, the United Nations body also urged all actors from resorting to violence. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, calls on the government to ensure that the proposed national dialogue be as broad-based as possible and ensure a genuine participation of opposition groups, women, youth, and marginalized groups, she said. Senegal has been seen as one of more stable democracies in the West African region, which has witnessed a string of military coups in recent years. In part 2, I'll bring you stories from Nigeria. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Now stories from Nigeria on economy matters, rising cost of living, federal government NLC meeting deadlocked. A meeting between the federal government and organized labor on Monday night to stave off the scheduled strike by the Nigeria Labour Congress and Trade Union Congress ended in deadlock. Nkiruka Onyechocha, the Minister of State Labour and Employment, who hosted the meeting in Abuja, could not convince the unions to suspend the strike slated for February 23rd. This was as the Association of Master Bakers and Caterers of Nigeria threatened to down tools by February 27, 2024, if the federal government failed to implement the agreement it entered into with the association in 2020. Mohammed Idris, the Minister of Information and National Orientation, according to reports on Tuesday, sought the understanding of the union, saying, "We are optimistic Labour will see reason and strike will be averted in the interests of the nation." On February 8th, the NLC and the TUC issued a 14-day nationwide strike notice to the federal government over the failure of the Bola Tinubu-led government to implement the agreements reached on October 2nd, 2023, following the removal of the subsidy on premium motor spirit known as petrol. In a statement signed by the leaders of the two labor unions, Joe Ajaero and Festus Osifo, the organized labor stated sadness that in spite of the passage of time, the majority of these crucial agreements remain unmet or negligibly addressed, indicating a blatant disregard for the principles of good faith, welfare and rights of Nigerian workers and Nigerians. The union said despite the efforts to ensure industrial peace, the government appeared unperturbed by the mass suffering and hardship across the country. After the removal of the full subsidy by the President on May 29, 2023, the labor unions reached a 16-point agreement with the federal government on actions to mitigate the pains of the subsidy removal on the workers. And finally, on the news on security matters, Senate queries service chiefs on insecurity. On Tuesday, the Senate asked security agencies to adopt proper collaboration in their operations to tackle the insecurity in Nigeria. The Senate also urged Wale Edun, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, to ensure the quick release of funds to the military to combat insecurity. Godswill Akpabio, the President of the Senate, stated this after closely 10-hour meeting with service chiefs on the state of insecurity, including reported issues of kidnapping and banditry across the country. He said the Senate was overwhelmed with the determination of the intelligence heads, urging them to do more. Akpabio also noted that nearly 90% of perpetrators of heinous crimes in parts of Abuja have been apprehended and will be prosecuted. Those in attendance include the National Security Advisor NSA, Nuhu Ribadu, the Chief of Defense Staff CDS, General Christopher Musa, Chief of Army Staff COAS, Lieutenant General Tarid Lagbaja, Chief of Air Staff CSA, Air Marshal Hassan Abubakar, and Chief of Naval Staff Vice Admiral Emmanuel Ogala. Others are the Inspector General of Police Kayode Ogbeto-kun, the Director General of the Department of State Services DSS, Yusuf Bichi, and the Director General of the National Intelligence Agency NIA, Ahmed Abubakar. Ministers in attendance including the Minister of Defense Mohammed Badaru, Minister of State for Defense Bello Matawale, Minister of Police Affairs Ibrahim Gaidam, Minister of Interior Olubumi Tunji Ojo, and the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of Economy Wale Edun. Let's take another look at the top stories. Indonesia's massive election vote count begins. Israeli strikes deep in Rafah, panic. House impeaches first cabinet member in 150 years. Senate passes $95 billion aid for Ukraine and Israel. And Biden slams Trump on Putin NATO breach. And that's all on the news. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.